everyone. This is really strange. This is cool. Thanks for being at the live stream. I'm going to wait a few minutes to let people come in and join the video feed. Get excited. Should start now, one of the comments says. I'm going to start in a few minutes to make sure everybody who wants to get on can get on, and then we can get started. Hopefully you guys have had a good Thursday so far. It's warm today here, but it's a little cloudy, which doesn't make for the best day, but at least it's feeling like spring. And if anybody has comments or questions that they want answered, feel free to use the chat function on the side, and I will be sure to answer them, or answer them to the best of my ability. Okay, so it's 2:02. We'll get started, and hopefully people will join and have questions and can catch themselves up on bees. So thanks for being here. We at the Mullikin Bee Lab, we're kind of just wanting to do some little science communication, answer questions. It's like the perfect time to start talking about bees and flowers and pollination, with spring happening and the weather getting a little bit warmer. And so we're all home. We decided to set this up and see how it goes, and I think it's going well so far. So a little bit about me. My name's Jenny. I am in the Camilo Mullikin Bee Lab at St. Louis University. I'm a PhD student there studying bees in urban environments, specifically pollen specialist bees. And I'll get into a little bit more about what that means later, but basically some bees only like to eat certain flowers' pollen, and so I look at those bees. But before I got to St. Louis University, I went to undergrad and got my master's in biology at Bradley University, studying plant-soil interactions with invasive plants. These things called garlic mustard that are not from around here and can spread really fast, and they can sometimes change soil chemistry after they've established. So I studied a little bit about that. And then after that, I worked in environmental consulting for about 6 years. So that involves doing wetland delineations for Clean Water Act permitting, and also doing bat surveys for Endangered Species Act permitting. So I got a wide variety of biology and environment experience. So if you have any questions related to plants, flowers, bees, bats, wetlands, environmental policy, I'll do my best to answer them. And if not, I can direct you to the best person to answer. So like I said, now I am a PhD student at St. Louis University. And in the lab, it's an urban bee lab. So we look at how bees, specifically in the St. Louis area, kind of are living, thriving, not thriving, and how the landscape of the urban environment kind of all come together and study that ecology. So ecology is a study of the environment, and urban ecology is study of plant-animal interactions in the environment, but also thrown in to a cityscape as opposed to a more natural area that we think of when we think of the environment. And so I got really interested in working with bees and pollination because I really enjoyed plants, actually. Flowers are pretty. And bees visit flowers. So I thought it was a good thing to study how, as the world, more and more people flock to cities and live in cities, how can we need to know more about the bees and the flowers in our cities to make them more sustainable and just to have a more enjoyable city too. It's nice when there's parks and green areas and flowers everywhere you go. So we have a question on the side here. If you were a bee, what type of bee would you be? It's a lot of bees. The first one that comes to mind is the bee that I study, which is the hibiscus bee. The hibiscus bee is a really cute bee. I have a picture of it right here. This is one of the specialists I study, and I'll go a little bit further into that later. But this bee is a really cute bee, and you can see she's all covered in pollen. That's all that yellowy white stuff on her legs. And so common with a lot of female bees, they have really hairy legs in order for them to visit flowers and collect pollen, and their pollen sticks to their leg hairs. So she goes to flowers like this, hibiscus. That's her down there. So if I were a bee, it'd be pretty cool to be a hibiscus bee. They nest communally, but separate. They're solitary bees, which means that they aren't living in a hive like honeybees are. Instead, they have individual nests that they provision themselves, but they also nest in the same area. Think of like a neighborhood where like you have your own house and you're the only one that lives in your house with your family, but you live within a neighborhood. So with these bees, it's like they make their own houses, but they have neighbors right next to them that are also hibiscus bees making their own houses and making their own nests. So yeah, it would be cool to be that bee. It would also be really fun to be an alfalfa leafcutter bee. If you have never heard of those, which I don't know why you would, but Google alfalfa leafcutter bee and watch them. They're able to cut out a piece of a leaf and fly with it, and then they line their nest cavity with the pieces of the leaf. And then they make their, they provision their nest within that. So it's really fun just to watch videos of them flying with their leaves, because you don't always see that, and that's kind of a fun thing that members of that family do. So like I said, I study pollen specialist bees. So what that means is that the bees are really only going to either one specific flower or a group of related flowers, or a limited subset of flowers for their pollen needs. And what that means is that they can be really efficient because, like in the case of this hibiscus bee, this female bee, actually, I think it's a female bee. This female bee is only visiting members of the Malvaceae, which is this hibiscus family. They're only going to visit flowers that look like this. So because of that, they're going to get really efficient at grabbing the pollen from the flower, and they're going to get really efficient at their commute. They're going to know exactly where to find those flowers, how long it takes to get there, the best route. So they get really efficient at that. So that's an advantage of being a specialist, is that your resources are, you're good at getting fed if they're there. And then also, to bring this photo back, specialist bees sometimes have special adaptations to help them with getting the pollen that they need from their special flower. So this hibiscus bee is covered in pollen. And so particularly the hibiscus family has really, really large pollen grains, and they're able to stick to the large hairs on the legs of the bees, and that way they can maximize their trips to and from the flowers. Because it takes a long time, right? I mean, it takes a lot of energy if you're constantly flying to and from a flower, back and forth all day. That's their job. They got two jobs: to build a nest and fly to flowers, and then start it all over again. So if half your day is you flying, you want to maximize the trips that you can make by getting as much pollen on you as possible. And so that's the good part about being a specialist as well. So there's about 770 bees in the eastern United States. Bee communities are kind of split between the eastern United States, east of the Rocky Mountains, and then the western United States, west of the Rocky Mountains. So here in St. Louis, we're in the eastern part of the United States, and that's what I know more about. So of the about 770 bees in the eastern United States, about 25% or a quarter of them are specialists in some way or another, whether they go to one flower, whether they go to a group of flowers, or if they're just kind of picky on like a few groups of flowers. And so pollination is really beneficial to both the flower and the plant. So the bees get their nutrients. So pollen is really, really nutrient dense. I've read recently that about a handful of pollen is about the same calories as a hamburger. So if you think about that, I mean, that's a lot of pollen, a lot of trips from flowers, but they're really nutrient dense. And so in that, the bee gets its nutrition of lipids, which are fats, proteins, and carbohydrates like sugars. And so they need that. And also their young, all the eggs that they're laying, also need that to develop. So with that, with pollination, the bees get their nutrition. And then on the other side, because it's a mutualism, so mutualism means that it's beneficial to both parties, the flowers get pollination services. So it's really important for flowers or plants that their flowers get pollinated. Some plants, they have to be pollinated from outside of themselves. So we call that cross-pollinated, when the pollen from one flower is used to pollinate another flower. Other plants can be self-pollinated, which means that it can use its own pollen to fertilize itself and to make seeds and fruit that way. But the benefit of being pollinated, so cross-pollination, being pollinated by something other than yourself or other than the same flower, is that usually we get bigger seeds, bigger fruits, or more seeds or more fruits when we get the cross-pollination. And so that's really important to note if you're trying to grow strawberries or tomatoes or any kind of crop, any kind of fruit. Like my backyard garden, I'm really hoping for a lot of bee visitors this summer to get some really nice big tomatoes, because those are the visitors, the bee pollinator visitors are what's really going to make the fruits big and have that nice flavor. So cross-pollination is important, not just for biology's sake, but also for our sake, for good food. So if anybody, I can keep rambling on pollination and bees and flowers, but if anybody has any questions, please let me know. I can stop at any point or expand on any aspect of the biology here. Okay, so back to specialist bees and pollinators. Some plants that have specialist bees associated with them include really pretty ones like the hibiscus, like I mentioned, like this one, hibiscus, woo. And then other plants it varies throughout the year. So we have some spring plants like willows that in St. Louis are starting to flower, or at least starting to bud. I haven't been outside too much lately. And then also Claytonia, which are these like spring beauties. You might start seeing them. They're really small. They're gonna come out the same time as like maybe violets. They look like a little white star or sometimes a light pink star. They're really pretty. So there's some special bees that only go to those flowers. And then you also get rhododendrons have specialist bees. Dogwoods have specialist bees associated with them. And then some late season flowers also, like sunflowers. There's a special sunflower bee. There's a special squash bee. There's a special ground cherry. Ground cherries are kind of like our version of tomatillos. So a lot of crops also have specialist bees associated with them. And that's not to say that those plants can't be pollinated by other things. There's definitely other things that pollinate these crops and flowers, but the specialist bees are more efficient at it, and there's a greater chance that those bees will go to visit another flower of the same species or the same type. So if you're a willow specialist, there's a greater chance that you're going to go visit another willow flower after the flower you just visited, thereby helping make sure that the cross-pollination is going to happen and that bee is delivering the pollen to the right flower. So, no questions. I must be doing really good at this, guys. So, other things about bees. There's other pollinators besides bees. I know I'm really only talking about bees because I'm in a bee lab, but there's other pollinators that are also specialists. Chocolate is one of the ones that comes to mind that requires a specific insect to pollinate it, but it's not bees. It's flies. I was gonna wait and have someone guess, but we're live, but we're not in person. So chocolate is required. It's dependent, on midge flies in order for it to pollinate. So can you imagine that? Like all the chocolate in the world, and we need a fly to get it to us. Otherwise, it won't get pollinated, and we won't have the fruits, the cacao fruits that we need in order to make chocolate. And then, oh, what else? There's for figs. Figs are dependent on wasps for pollination. So it's a really fun, if you really want to blow your mind on pollination, after this, go Google fig wasps. And there's plenty of videos describing fig wasp pollination. It is wild. They end up, the figs, or the wasps, I'm sorry, end up going into the fig itself to pollinate inside of the fruit. It's crazy. Go watch it. It's great. Let's see, I have a question. What flowers attract the most bees? That's a good question. So it totally depends on the flower. Actually, so I've been talking about specialist bees. There's also things called specialist flowers where they're shaped in a certain way to exclude everything but certain visitors. So there's also generalist flowers. Think of like a sunflower or not a clover, like a sunflower or a daisy or something that is pretty open to letting anything come to it. So that would be a generalist flower. And those tend to attract the most bees and the most visitors because they let all different bee types, sizes, times of year, kind of all the bees kind of get to them. In St. Louis, it's really good to plant things like bee balm or not milkweeds. Was it sunflowers? I'm trying to think of what I have in my garden right now. There's things called blazing stars. They're really, really pretty. Irises, those are great. Any native flowers. There's some shrubs that really attract pollinators. Some beauty berries. Man, I'm blanking on some major bee-related flowers. It'll come back to me. Actually, it'll come back to me really fast. Black-eyed Susans, echinaceas, a lot of things in the aster family seem to be really good at attracting a wide variety. Oh, thank you. Shrubby St. John's wort. Thank you, Charles Wright. Phlox, things like that just have a really open flower. Goldenrod in the late summer. So when you're thinking about planting flowers that attract a wide variety of bees, you can also think about it in terms of their seasonality, because different bees need flowers at different times of the year. There's going to be a totally different community of bees that come out in the spring. Like right now, we have a totally different community of bees that will be coming out now versus in summer and late summer. And they all need flowers and they all need pollen. So being able to plant your flowers in your garden in a way that extends the season is really important. Like for instance, my only visual aid, so I keep coming back to my hibiscus bees, but these bees, they don't come out until July, late June, early July, depending on where you're at. So if you think about it, there's, they're not even getting out until that time. So they need a lot of late season flowers. Well, they only need hibiscus, but that's another benefit of being a specialist. You're able to time your emergence to the emergence of your host flower. So that way, you're not wasting any energy or time hanging out outside waiting for your flowers to open. It's like going to a restaurant that opens at like 11 for lunch. If you get there at 10:30, which would be really early for lunch, but if you get there at 10:30 and it's not open, you're wasting 30 minutes of your day waiting for them to open at 11. Same with bees. They're just going to be wasting their energy waiting until their specialist flowers are open. Okay. Any other questions? One that I usually get is like, where are specialist bees in the city? And so that part is one of my favorite parts, because we think it's really important to have a lot of resources for bees. So a lot of flowers, and a lot of flowers spaced out so that it's not like, here's Forest Park, here's Tower Grove Park. You know, we need flowers between the two parks so that they can have rest over stops to get to different areas of the city. So that's really important. But we don't always think about the fact that bees can be not just in really pretty parks, but also in our backyards, in our schoolyards. And so these are some of the places where I find the specialist bees. Some of my sites include one of the elementary schools in South St. Louis. I've even found my bees in the IKEA parking lot. So we think like the IKEA in St. Louis parking lot is grass, dirt, asphalt, and hibiscus flowers. And then because they have water, dirt, and hibiscus flowers, they're able to grow and make that a living. And so don't discount a really small area with only a few flowers, because something is going to use it, whether or not they're going to nest there or they're going to use it as a stepping stone to get to a greater area of flowers and a more resource-rich area. So that's the fun part for me, is going online and trying to find where people have seen hibiscus or where people have seen another type of flower, and going there and just kind of hanging out and seeing what bees might be there and seeing if I can find any specialists in the city. And then other areas in the city that I've found specialists are, a really big one is community gardens. So if you have the resources to create a community garden, whether it's like a lot that isn't used very much or like a corner of your neighborhood, see if you can get some neighbors together and make a community garden, because you'd be amazed how quickly some specialists like squash bees or sunflower bees will find it and make it their home. And it's a great place to meet your neighbors. And you can stay 6 feet away from your neighbors in a community garden pretty easily, at least I think. So yeah, I got a question. How many types of bees are there in our region? That's a good question. In the city of St. Louis, so the lab I'm in a few years ago did a really big survey of the city to see how many bees that are in the city, and then compared that to generally Missouri, how many bees are found in the state. So in the state of Missouri, there's over 400. I want to say 440-ish. Don't totally quote me on that, just more than 400 about. In the city of St. Louis, there's just about 200. So if you can imagine, we're holding about half of the species, the types of bees in the state, just within the city of St. Louis. So, and these range from really, really small bees, really, really big bees, like the Carpenter bees that you find, really, really big ones, early spring ones, late summer ones, some metallic bees, some green metallic bees, sweat bees, all different types. Let's see. What is your favorite bee to study? I keep talking about the hibiscus bee. That's probably my favorite bee to study just because I've studied it for almost 3 years now. And I just think they're really gentle and really cute, and they have their own personalities. So it's really fun to just kind of watch them and find new things about them. Another fun bee to study is the squash bee, because the squash bee, they're another specialist, and they are timed, not just their emergence in the summer is timed, but also their daily routine is timed to the opening of their special squash flowers. So the special squash flowers, not special, squash flowers open early in the morning. And so that means the bees have to wake up really, really early in the morning. So they might be done working by 10, 11, noon. They're a really early bee. So can you imagine being done with your day for the day at like 10 or 11 or noon? Like, that'd be cool, because then you have, what they do is they take a little nap in the flowers once they're done. So if you have squash plants, or you're planning on planting squash plants this year, it's not even time to plant them yet, I don't think. I haven't planted mine yet, so we're not too, you can start them now and see what comes this summer. But check in an open flower by about noon, and you're going to have, if there's squash bees around and have found the flower, in the center of the flower, there might be some sleeping squash bees. So they're really cute. So that's another fun one to study. And that one, that squash bee, they've done some research recently that's shown that humans have actually helped that bee kind of live in other parts of the country that they weren't normally from. So the squash bee, the center of diversity for the squash bee is more in the Mexico and the American Southwest, like that region. But because humans enjoy squash, I enjoy squash, we've taken those plants with us as we've moved across the country, or the continent, I should say. And the bees have moved with the movement of the flowers. So that's a really fun thing we can study and learn from our behavior in our diets and bee behavior. Let's see. What are some common misconceptions about bees? Some common misconceptions. My favorite one is that they're all going to sting you. And that's not true. First of all, only female bees have stingers. Male bees do not have stingers at all. So one of my advisor's favorite things to do is not favorite, but one of the things he likes to do, a party trick, is just to grab a male bee and hold it in your hand, and people might get uneasy because they think it's going to sting you or sting him, and no, they won't, because males don't have stingers. Only females do, and they're only going to use them if they're needing to defend themselves or needing to defend their nest. It's not something that they will use liberally. They don't want to sting you. That's not something that would benefit them. It takes energy, it's costly, and they just want to be going about their day, going to their flowers, going to their nests, and that's it. So bees will not try to sting you unless provoked, and only females have stingers. That's one common misconception. Another common misconception is that there's only one type of bee or a few types of bees. Like I said, there's over 400 in Missouri alone and about 770 in the eastern United States. And they're all different. Some of them are solitary, like my favorite hibiscus bee right here. And then some of them are social. So if you think of honeybees, that's a social bee. And they live in hives. Bumblebees are also social. Other bees, like sweat bees, can be social under the right conditions. And so there's misconception that all bees are honeybees, all bees are social. And that's just not true. Most bees are actually solitary, like the hibiscus bee. And about most of the bees I've mentioned, most of the specialist bees, I can't say all, but most of the specialist bees that I know of are solitary. The other misconception is that all bees nest in hives. And again, that's not true because only social bees nest in hives. And most bees are actually ground nesting bees. So if you find little holes in the ground, that could be a bee nest. The hibiscus bees, they're just good examples of everything that I know. They make little chimneys on the top of the soil to find their nests. Other bees nest in cavities. So if you've heard about making bee hotels, that's so that the cavity nesting bees can insert their eggs and their pollen loads into the cavities that you make when you make a bee hotel. And then some of them like to nest in existing cavities. So like small little rodent dens or holes created by something else. They will use pre-existing holes. Some bumblebees use existing like rodent holes. Carpenter bees, they can make their own holes, but they will also use already existing bees holes from the previous year's carpenter bees or from something else, as long as it's kind of the right size. So that's the other misconception, is that bees are only have one mode of nesting, which is just not true. And most bees are actually ground nesting. About 70% of bees are ground nesting bees. So thanks for the question. That was a great question. Let's see, the next one. Are bees here native to the US and North America, or did they get brought here by Europeans and others? Thanks. That's a great question too. So we do have, so like I said, there's about 770 native bees. I haven't used the word native. There's those bees that we have in the United States are native to the United States and Eastern North America. But we do have some that have been brought here from Europeans, most notably the honeybee. The honeybee is native to Europe, and people brought it over because it was what they were used to. They wanted and they've done this with a lot of flowers as well. Like you get used to certain things from home and you bring it over to your next home. So people brought honeybees and so they could make honey for us. And today they're a really big commercial commodity to make people take their hives to different fields and they pollinate the crops in the fields. And I won't get into too much about honeybee pollination because I think Nina's probably going to talk about that in more detail tomorrow. But basically honeybees, and there's a few other, like there's a European wool carder bee. So to card wool means to like gather a bunch of materials to make wool. So these are wool carding bees, which is a strange name, but it explains their behavior. So there's certain plants that have hairs on their leaves. And so the bee will come by and gather all the hairs on the top of the leaf. And they will use that to make their nest, to line their nest with all these hairs. And so that's these European wool carder bees came over, and that's where their name comes from. And they have very cool designs on the back of their bodies, and they have a really fun behavior. But those ones are not from around here either. And those are two examples. There's other bees that are not from North America that have been brought over either on purpose or on accident. It happens throughout the world, not just bees, but plants, snakes, animals, viruses, anything. But yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And then the only problem with bringing over, not the only, one of the problems with bringing over non-native species is just we only have so many plants and places to live. And so those bees are then competing with native bees for resources, and sometimes out-competing them, leaving our native bees to not have a lot of resources that they should to keep making new nests and getting more pollen. So thank you. My 7-year-old son, Atticus, would like to ask, why do bees make honey? Atticus, that's a great question. Thank you. Bees make honey for not for humans, surprisingly enough. We just happen to really like it, so we use it. But they make honey for themselves. So what happens is that the bee goes to a flower and gets pollen. It digests some pollen because it's really good stuff to eat. It has a lot of nutrition. And then they go back to their nest, and they deposit that pollen in the hive. And so then it's another bee's job to work that material and to make it into a form that the baby bees, the larval stage is what we call like a baby bee, basically. Bees have more stages, but the larval baby bee stage, they kind of transform that pollen into a form that the little ones can eat. And in that process, they make honey. They also make a thing called royal jelly, which is what they feed specific baby bees that will become queen bees, which is why people nickname it the royal jelly. So it's all about feeding their young and making the next generation of honeybees. I wish I knew more about honey making. It's really big and really popular for people to keep bees, but I don't. I just grow flowers and let other bees live and grow their own, make their own nests and pollen and stuff. So thank you for that question. What's the most interesting thing you have learned about bees since you have started studying them? I learned a lot of interesting things about bees. Mostly that there's a lot of different types. Like I always knew that there are a lot of types of bees, but once you really start looking at what we have out there, it's pretty amazing. Like I said, we have really, really small bees that like are barely a speck in size, and you have to basically look at them under a microscope to see them. We have really big bees. We have really pretty, I took a bee identification course in January, and I was really like a little kid being attracted to the shiny ones. Like I loved all of the shiny blue bees and green bees because I knew we had them, but until you see them under a microscope and up close, it's just amazing to see the pretty colors, which sounds silly, but they're really cute and really cool. Other amazing things about bees, just like how resilient they are, like their whole day is made up of flying to flowers, and they have great sense of direction. They know where they're going, how to get back to their hive or their nest, how to communicate to other bees about the best resources. Bumblebees and honeybees will do like a waggle dance. They'll be like, hey friend, saw some great sunflowers over there. Just turn left at the mailbox and down the street past this maple tree and you got it. Like all through dancing or movements. So that part is really cool. And just the different modes of specialization of bees and how they've been able to time themselves so well and kind of adapt themselves so well to a specific resource is just really cool to me. All right, next question. Are there bees that live in deserts or near the poles, or are they generally in more habitable environments? That's a great question. There's definitely bees in deserts. And actually, there's a greater percentage of specialist bees in deserts. I was just reading about a few. So if you think of a desert, the bees there, or the flowers there, the plants there don't always bloom every year. It's just not possible. There's not enough water. So it might be a few years in between bloom periods. So this is really important for bees to know so that they can time when they're going to come out and try to find flowers. So there's these really cool mutualism between creosote bushes, which is a flower out in deserts, and the bees, and how they like emerge around the same time, even if that emergence is years apart. And then there are also generalist bees in deserts as well. There's some great people who do research out in like Arizona and deserts in the American Southwest. So I encourage you to look up desert bees if that's interesting to you, because there's a lot of different types and it's really cool. Bees in the poles, I think it might be too cold. On was it Tuesday, Alan from our lab, he researches bees in the Himalayas. So bees can withstand very cold mountain-like temperatures in high elevations. So I'm sure there are some bees in the poles, I'm not sure. Another interesting thing about the distribution of bees is that for whatever reason, most diversity of animals is the highest around the equator. So in the tropical areas is where you're going to find like the highest diversity of most animals and plants. But with bees, that's actually not the case. They're one of the few groups that once you get to more of like a Mediterranean climate, that's where you're going to get the highest diversity of bees, just outside of the pole, outside of the equator. So great question. Thank you. Another one. You talked about different kinds of pollinators. Is it true that mosquitoes are technically pollinators? Yes, that is true. They can pollinate. There's a question of whether or not they're intentionally pollinating or if they're actually good at it. That's up for debate. But they definitely visit flowers, and within their visitation from going to flower can pass along pollen grains. And so by definition, they can be pollinators. And I mentioned a little earlier about cacao. So the plant that we use to make chocolate is pollinated by a midge fly. And so that's in the same order of insects as mosquitoes. They're all flies. So one of its not so closely related cousins is a pretty important pollinator as well. So good question. I'm gonna grab a sip of water. It's hard talking for an hour, guys. Okay. Another question. Awesome. Thank you for all these good questions. What's the most interesting question scientists have about bees? What do you wish you knew? Oh, so I'm not sure what, I'm sure every scientist would have a different idea for that answer. The question that I am trying to figure out for my dissertation is how specialist bees are thriving in urban environments. So that's a pretty interesting question to me, and it's something I wish I knew. So in St. Louis specifically, we have a really high abundance of specialist bees. And this is really cool for the city to have a lot of diversity, a lot of different types of bees. But also, we want to know why. Why is St. Louis special? And something about the city that's special that specialist bees can thrive here? Or is it just that we haven't done enough research in other cities to show maybe there are a few more specialists? There's only a handful of cities in the Midwest that have been really studied very well for their bee communities. So between those, St. Louis still has a really high diversity of specialists, including the bee of the day, the hibiscus bee, is found throughout the city. And it's found in a few other cities as well. So that's what I'm trying to figure out is it about the bee switching its diet? Is it about the bee switching its behavior? Is it, can it handle higher temperatures? What is it going on that it really likes to live here? Maybe it just really likes the arch, and so it just told all of its friends to come here. Who knows? That's not true, but it's a hypothesis nonetheless. Other really interesting questions about bees are their behavior is really cool. So just how they're able to, what attracts them to flowers. They have a different kind of vision than humans do. They can see in ultraviolet. And so there's a lot of research on, are they sensing flowers with their eyes? Are they sensing it with their noses, with like floral odors? Are they, that's basically the two, but how are they sensing and how are they finding their flowers? Because that is a really big part of their life, is going to and from flowers. So knowing more about that is really important. Another question, what are bees' main predators? Maybe there are a lot in St. Louis because there aren't very many predators here. That's another great question. So bees in general, their predators will be other insects, or bigger bees can be predated on or eaten by some birds or bats or different like flying animals. Other pathogens like parasites are another big, not necessarily predator. I don't know if that would technically be the correct word, but another reason why bees don't survive, put it that way. So there's a lot of we call them parasitic wasps or parasitoids or parasitic bees as well that use their nests, and so they put their own eggs in the nest of the bees, and thereby kind of destroying the original bees' eggs that were there. They can either inject certain venoms, I guess, to the bees to destroy them that way. So we're talking about like really bad things. But those are kind of their main predators. And the fun thing about St. Louis is we do have a lot of parasitic bees in the city. So that's another good sign of a good ecosystem and a good habitat is that we have those bees, because that means that their host bees are here as well, and we have a good diversity of bees in the city. All right, another question. Why do you feel so many scientists don't focus on urban areas where most people live, and why have you chosen to stay within the urban setting? Great question, thanks. I feel like urban areas are just now becoming a cool area of study. It wasn't until like the 1990s, where people realized, wow, cities make up way more of the planet than we are really giving them credit for. There's all of this really cool interaction between animals and plants and humans, and interactions between animals and plants that would not in nature have ever been together had humans not put them together there. So if you think like the honeybee would never have run into a dogwood tree, because the honeybee's from Europe and the dogwood tree is from the United States, had we not brought them together. So that aspect is really cool about urban ecology, just looking at all these new interactions and new ways that animals and plants are surviving in new situations. Nature is really cool, and it's able through selection to really find a way to survive. So if it's possible to survive, eventually there might be a new adaptation, or there might be some new kind of behavior allowing plants and animals to survive in their new environment. So that's the really cool thing about urban ecology, is that it lends itself to this new discovery of ways of living or ways of interacting with the world that I don't think it's actually a really growing area of study now, and there's a lot of really cool research being done in cities, and not just on bees, but on everything: pigeons and mosquitoes and birds, other birds besides pigeons, and rats and snakes and plants and trees, and just even fish and our abiotics, so our things like water and other resources in the city that were never studied before. So yeah, that's why I like urban ecology. It's really fun. Thank you. We got a few more questions. Atticus would like to know, what type of bee is the biggest? That's a good question, Atticus. Thank you. I can be completely wrong. I don't know the biggest bee in the world. The biggest bee that you're going to find in your backyard would be the Carpenter bee. They're really, really big. They make a really loud buzzing sound if you see one zoom past you. And yeah, they like to set up territories when they are in a yard. So they like to chase anything out of their territory, anything flying. So if you think about, I've seen people like, if you just like toss a rock or a piece of mulch or like something in a carpenter bee's general vicinity, don't throw it at the bee. That would be mean. But if you just like toss it and you'll watch them, they'll fly at whatever is flying in their territory because they want to defend it. And they're big bees, so they have the muscle to back it up. So, yeah, one more question. Do bees that aren't honeybees make honey? That's a good question. Short answer is yes. Long answer, I don't know another species of bee that makes honey that people eat because they don't make it in high enough quantity in order to do so. Yeah, I think I can't think of any ones that we eat besides honeybee honey. But they definitely do make it. And then bees also, I guess that's not really honey. Some bees make resins, which is just like an oily, sticky goo that I wouldn't call honey, but it has the same kind of viscous, it's kind of a big word, like same material flow as honey. Cool. Well, if any more questions, I know it's a little bit past 3, but if we have any more questions, and if not, thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope if you do think of any questions later on, feel free to email us, billikenbeelab@slu.edu, or check out our website or email me. It'll be on the website. So yeah, have a good spring. Plant as many flowers and fun things as you can because bees will find them and bees will eat them, and give you really good flowers for the next year, good seeds for the next year, good crops for the next year, depending on what you plant. And yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys. Bye.